Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Americans for Truth Hour. Americans for Truth About Homosexuality is a single-issue organization devoted to opposing the powerful homosexual activist lobby. And we're very grateful to have Judith Reisman for a 4-part interview. Is that right, Judith?
Yeah, that's what. Okay.
I sort of roped you into 4 because Judith is one of my favorite people. She's got so much to say, and she's done so much to alert the nation to this incredible conspiracy, as it were, this scandalous use of Alfred Kinsey as the basis for sex education and sex studies, whatever you want to call it, Judith. And, we were talking off the air before here today about words and how words have lost their meaning. And, Judith, one word that I think should not be lost is, there goes my phone. One word that should not, the meaning should not be lost is the word pervert. And
from perversion, right? Yeah.
From perversion. And is it safe to say that Dr. Alfred Kinsey was a pervert?
Oh, indeed. I mean, I said that on the Phil Donahue show, when I did it.
I bet Phil loved that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, yes. It was just too blunt, but it was, of course, quite true. We had just, Donahue had just gotten, accidentally, didn't mean to, but he got a confession from Kinsey's spokesman there, and Kinsey's spokesman, Clarence Tripp, said that Kinsey relied on pedophiles for his research on children, and that they were just very responsible pedophiles because, and I'm quoting, he said, they used stopwatches to record their thing, which was that they were torturing the little children, and children as young as 2 months of age. At which point, I said, you're defending a pervert. I mean, this is a predator and a pervert. And of course, Donahue could not deny that, nor could anybody in the entire audience. They all stood up absolutely. I mean, there were people outraged, not at me, but at the fact that indeed this is exactly what Kinsey was. Mm-hmm.
So he was, and he had a perversion problem himself. I mean, describe this. Oh yeah. Coming from as a boy, right? I mean, talk about how Kinsey became the person he was. I mean, was he molested himself when he was young?
Yeah, well, now that's, of course, we don't have any proof in terms of that, but in terms of the profile of a molested child, right? Kinsey fits that profile profoundly. The biography of, we had several very positive biographies. I'm the only one who's ever written at length on him that wasn't celebrating him, but his biographies all sort of accuse his father of being unkind, and nobody claims that Kinsey was ever harmed by his father, hit by his father, or anything like that. But it appears that someone in his background as a young child introduced him to sexual activity that really traumatized him, because as a result, as an early or young child, it turns out that he was actually really torturing himself. I'm trying to think how to say this properly, but, below the belt, doing a lot of torture to himself, which in the long run truly compromised him to the extent that he appears to have died of orchitis or related problems associated with that, which is a venereal disease, and also it has to do with the trauma to the genital organs. And so Kinsey had been traumatizing his organs. He would hang himself from rafters at the university when he was a full professor, and collapse on the floor, and he would use instruments on himself and so forth. So yes, I mean, the man was deeply disturbed. He was a compulsive masturbator, which is one of the reasons, for his promotion of this activity as completely harmless, although it appears to more than damaged him, and because of his obsessiveness. And
now, Judith, our show airs at 11 o'clock at night on Saturday, so we're pre-taping on Wednesday, the 8th of June. But so we can talk about this, but if you're a child listening and your parent and your children's in the room,
please.
Tell them to leave. But I mean, you tried to describe it, but Kinsey was.
Well, I'm trying to. I'm really not able.
He was inserting foreign objects up his urethra. Is that what he was doing?
Yeah, that is what he was doing.
And then you say he moved on to when he was now, and there's some speculation that it may even have directly caused his death. I mean, he was hanging himself like a sadomasochist from his genitals. He was attaching it to a. I mean,
Peter, my goodness, yes, indeed, that's what. Yeah,
but I mean, this is still. I think this is so scandalous that we all get our sex information. The whole industry is based on this man who is obviously severely troubled. Now, was he was married, but yet is it fair to claim to describe him as a homosexual? Was he bisexual? How would you describe him?
Yeah, well, there's been a big argument about that. The Kinsey Institute does not like him to be called homosexual, which I don't quite understand because they're in such defense of this way of life. But personally, as far as I can see, the smoking, he's had 4 children, so you could call him either bisexual or you could call him homosexual because, of course, he focused on sex with his male students. He focused on sex with the male subjects that he was so-called interviewing. These are the objective researchers that were carrying out this basic research that has moved and shaped the Western world. And so he was engaged with sex with all males as soon as young, attractive males, I must say, as soon as he possibly could. But you know, it's very interesting. The film Kinsey that was starring Liam Neeson, a heroic figure, played him as essentially a heroic figure who had a few warts and problems, and of course they blamed his wife for his being unable to be functioning properly when they got married. But the simple reality is that you can't do those things to the genital organs in the way that he did, and still expect to function as a normal male when in your first experience with a woman. And that's apparently what happened. So their wedding night was not exactly a pleasant experience for either one of them, apparently.
All right, and you're breaking up a little here, the line, Judith, so hopefully we won't have to call you back. But and so we're catching a picture of a man who was deeply troubled. He was engaging in something happened in his life to want to mutilate and harm himself. The very practice which is now being mainstream in our culture of sadomasochism, which also they can look back and say that Kinsey, just as he helped mainstream homosexual perversion, now we see the culture regressing further. Now we see the effort to mainstream sadomasochism, which I guess is consensual sexual violence. You see the video now. There's a popular video. Well, there's a video by Rihanna called S&M. It's astonishing, but it's so creepy that the very guy who's helped do all this and now is helping rationalize this misbehavior was into it way back then.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no question about that. And, he's the one who's mainstreamed. Look, NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, they state, and it's in my book, and I please people buy the book. Don't just listen to this interview or these interviews, but read what I've put together for you in Sexual Sabotage. Because when we look at what Kinsey was actually doing, you have to say that he fits the profile of a sadomasochistic pedophile, or a pederast, really. And you have to say that because when I first read Kinsey's writings, and when he first described what he called children's orgasms and infant orgasms, which were all the result of what he called pleasure, He said these children were fainting, they were having convulsions. He said they were screaming and writhing in pain. He said that they were striking the man who was doing this to them. He said that they fainted. Did I say fainted? And weeping. He said, and hysterical weeping, especially among the younger children. He said. Now that's only a sadomasochistic pedophile can call that pleasure. So yes, indeed, I would say there's no question, based on his own writing, that Kinsey was a sadomasochistic pedophile, actually a pederast, because these were all boy victims, and he transferred that pederasty, that pedophilia, that exploitation of children into his work, which then translated into NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, which said boy lovers and pedophiles should know Kinsey's work and hold it dear, because that is the crux of what we fight for today.
Wow, Judith, it's amazing, and I want to talk about the modern application of the ideologies today when I get back after the break. We're talking to Dr. Judith Reisman. Her website is Dr. Judith Reisman, drjudithreisman.com. She's the founder of the Institute for Media Education. She's the author of Sexual Sabotage, which you can get at WorldNet Daily Books. Sexual Sabotage. She's author of other books, Kinsey, Sex, and Fraud, among them. We'll be right back after the break with Judith Reisman. I'm Peter LaBarber with Americans for Truth. Our website is americansfortruth.org. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Pete LaBarber with Americans for Truth about homosexuality, and we're in part 2 of our interview with Dr. Judith Reisman. Dr. Reisman is the founder of the Institute for Media Education. She is prolific. She's written several books, among them Kinsey, Sex, and Fraud, Kinsey, Crimes and Consequences, and her most recent book about Kinsey, Sexual Sabotage, which is available through WorldNet Daily Books and also Amazon.com. And Judith, okay, so what I was going to explain to you was something you know. I mean, you've explained how Kinsey helped mainstream the homosexual movement. Just recently in Chicago, it turns out that Chicago is one of the most perverted cities in the world. It has one of the oldest homosexual movements in the world, and including one of the earliest gay rights advocates in the United States. But just recently, on Memorial Day weekend, they held, as they do every year, the International Mr. Leather event. This is a gathering of people who, I suppose you could say, some of them had the same perversion problem as Alfred Kinsey. It's a sadomasochist event. It was held this year at the Hyatt Regency Chicago, and I'm going to give out the phone number because this is an extraordinary gathering in which basically the most heinous perversions known to mankind, including men urinating on one another and in one another, are encouraged and celebrated.
Peter, oh my, okay, go on.
And so this is sadomasochism, and why not? If there are no limits, right, Judith?
Sure.
If there's no boundaries in society, no boundaries for sex, then who's to say that, the so-called, one of the things they champion is so-called pig sex. I mean, you can't even describe it, and that's one of the catch-22s of the entire homosexual movement. Some of it gets so, especially on its fringes, it gets so disgusting and gross that you can't explain it. And you almost can't fathom it. Well, anyways, every year in Chicago, they buy out a hotel for a couple days. And this year it was at the Hyatt Regency Chicago on Wacker Drive, 151 East Wacker. It's Chicago Regency, Hyatt Regency Chicago on the Riverwalk. I'm going to give out the phone numbers. And I would just encourage people, if you're ever coming to Chicago, don't stay at the Hyatt Regency. And here's why. I mean, well, number one, you're rewarding a hotel that promotes perversion, profits off perversion. But Judith, I mean, the stuff that these people do is so disgusting and revolting that I think it must require some kind of special chemical cleanup just to make the room habitable again. Oh yeah,
you could not. Excuse me, you could not possibly have regular quote maid service. Excuse me, to deal with the fluids and the blood and all the other things that come out of this kind of activity. And Peter, at the bottom, I hate to be double entendre here, but at the bottom of all of this really is the shame and the horror that I can't emphasize this enough. The trauma that almost all homosexual males and females have experienced as children sexually, and the fact that today there's such an effort to force homosexual women and men to pretend that they did not have these kinds of traumatic experiences early on, to me is unconscionable, because we're really talking about blaming the victim, what happens with these youngsters who have been exposed to these terrible experiences. Once they've been exposed by a same-sex person, they are then told that they are gay. They are convinced that they are gay, and therefore that what happens to them is their own fault, you see. Yeah. Now, you can't do that to people. I mean, you can't do that to youngsters, and you can't do it to them and expect that they're going to grow up and be perfectly happy, content people who are going to then, meet the girl of their dreams or the boy of their dreams and get married and have children and all that sort of thing. Now, some will. I mean, some people come through these things. I've interviewed many guys who were sexually molested as children, who went on to live perfectly normal lives. But I've also interviewed many, many, many more within the homosexual movement who have had this abuse at an early time, and we're never able to overcome it. We're never able to get beyond it, and so the effort,
the societal effort to rationalize the behavior becomes part of the sort of the cover up to say it's normal, and so there's a huge amount of energy invested in the movement in saying that homosexuality is normal, because to say otherwise is to implicate the behavior that's being practiced. Now, before we go on to that, Judith, I want to give out this phone number for the Hyatt Regency Chicago. The number is 312-565-1234. That's 312-565-1234. I would urge people to call them and say that they should not profit off this awful perversion, this sadomasochism, and that you will not be staying at the Hyatt Regency because of this. But Judith, has America gotten so immoral that we are actually now saying that even sadomasochism is not aberrant?
Well, I don't know that we're saying it, but I certainly know that it's something that's being pushed and promoted by the elite, in our society. I mean, it's being promoted by the entertainment industry, which is highly, as you know, highly influenced by the homosexual movement, which is really, which is really a damaged. We're talking about very damaged folks who've gone through terrible experiences, and they transmit that onward. Now,
tell that example that you told me. Tell the example that you told me, Judith, about without the name of somebody who actually went through it.
Yeah, I mean, he's typical of many I've talked to. But I'll tell you about him one second before I do. I don't want to forget John Gagnon, one of big Kinsey researchers, warned those in the homosexual movement years ago. He said, most important, he says, is don't look to try and find the origin of why you are homosexual. He says you mustn't do that, because if you do that, you will be giving strength to the right wing, conservative wacko people like me, I suppose. And of course, who tells a person not to investigate why their lives are so upside down and distressing? Well, of course you try to find that out. Well, he didn't want them to. And here's an example. Yeah, I was lecturing at a conference for recovering homosexuals. There's so many groups out there now. And at the end of the conference, a young man who was attending drove me home. And by the way, there was such a reception by these guys. When you tell them about the two issues that were predominant in their lives, one would be Kinsey and the other is pornography, i.e. Playboy in those years. It's the light goes on for so many guys because that's what was done to them. But anyway, so So this young man is driving me home, and on the way I say, well, tell me, John or Sam or whatever, when was your first sexual experience? And
this is an ex-gay. This is a guy who's identified himself as ex-gay.
Right. Yeah. He's ex. He's trying to stay ex, which is always difficult. And once you've gotten into that, especially for guys, a little easier for girls, it's more difficult for guys. But anyway, to stay ex. So he says, my first sexual experience, I think I was about 19 or so, a little older even. And I said, well, that's kind of late for someone who has entered into this lifestyle, and that's kind of interesting. So we're driving along, and at a certain point I say to him, let me ask you something. I said, did you guys have pornography in your house? And he said, well, yeah, sure. He said, my father used to have the magazines, Playboy and Penthouse, that sort of stuff. He said, and I said, where were they? And he said, in the front closet, And I said, oh, really? And your mother knew that? Mm-hmm, yeah, sure. And you had an older brother, didn't you? Yeah, I had an older brother. It's the brother that calls him a fag all the time, by the way. And can't understand why he turned out like that. And I said, well, did you ever look at those magazines? He said, well, I don't, he was sort of hemmed and hawed about it. And I said, what about your brother? And he said, oh yeah, he used to look at them all the time. And he said he'd come into my room, and then he described that the brother would climb on him when he was in bed. And he was a boy, he was at the time about 5 years old or something. He was a good deal younger than the brother. And he would actually, as he explained what he did on top of him, he was molesting this boy, his little brother. And I said, well, wait a minute, Tom or Harry. I said, then what you're saying to me is your first sexual experiences were when you were about 4 or 5 years old, because he said it was about 4 or 5. So he sort of, he didn't say anything for a minute. He just was stunned. He was driving. I hoped he didn't, pull over and
wow.
Anyway, and so then finally he said, actually I think he did pull over at that point and just stop. And he said, I hadn't thought about that. He said, sexual? So I said, well, what you described that he was doing on top of you after looking at the pornography, that's sexual. And I said, so then that means you were first molested by a male, your brother, when you were 4 or 5 years old. And he said, my gosh, yes.
Wow.
I never even, he never allowed himself to think that, you see. This was an older brother. You worship your older brother, don't you? And his older brother had spent years telling him, what's wrong with you? Why are you a fag? Well, older brother, look what you did after you got through with your porn, to this child.
Wow, Judith, that is amazing. And I wonder how many lives are like that, where there's just abuse that almost is so horrible it wasn't even thought about. We're talking to Judith Reisman, who's the founder of the Institute for Media Education. Her website is drjudithreisman.com. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to the Americans for Truth Hour. We're talking to Dr. Judith Reisman, who is the person who the world owes a debt of gratitude to because she has shed light on this awful sham of sexology. And Judith, following up on that story, which is really incredibly compelling, and our hearts go out to these people. My heart goes out to homosexuals and people who are victims of pornography and sexual deviance and predations. I mean, it's really, and all the gender, I can't imagine what's gone on in the lives of these transgender people, Judith, but I'm thinking...
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Don Lemon now, the CNN correspondent. I can't remember if we discussed this last week, but, Don Lemon he was a reporter TV reporter in Chicago and other places. I sort of knew he was a homosexual activist because he spoke at a gay activist event, homosexual activist event in Chicago called Equality Illinois. But recently, this is very interesting, Judith. He was covering a story on homosexual molestations by alleged by Eddie Long, pastor, megachurch pastor in Atlanta. And then he he revealed on the air that he, Don Lemon, was the victim of child molestation. And he said that's why this is so important to him. Well, now in his new book, Mr. Lemon, CNN, very big host, you see him all over CNN, African-American fellow. Don Lemon says that he's gay, and he's coming out of the closet, which is a terrible phrase. I don't really think it correlates to truth, but he's come out as a gay guy. And so I want to tell him, Don, you're not gay. You're the victim of a pedophile. Yeah, absolutely. A pedophile, or indeed a pederast. And this is one of my most, well, if I was going to speak to anything, I would speak to the fact that thousands of boys, in our analysis of The Advocate compared to the Washingtonian. The Advocate being a homosexual magazine. Yeah, in search of advertisements, yeah. In our analysis of that magazine, there was a graph, a chart produced by The Advocate at the time. This is back in 1990-something, I don't remember now, 4, I suppose. And in that chart, they identified well over 9,000 boys who were dying of AIDS at that time, who were either dead or dying, one or the other. Now, and they called them gay. All right. Now look, my question is this. We're dealing with thousands and thousands of people dying of AIDS. Where are all the men who have violated these youngsters? Where are they being arrested? They are not being arrested, are they? Right. So if you've got all these people dying of AIDS, then why are you not arresting their killers? And they're not. Do you see thousands being arrested for actual manslaughter or murder, really? And to me, it's like we're in the middle of a major war, and children are being murdered, and nobody seems to be ready to do anything about it. Why? Because they mislabel them. They just label the victims gay. They tell them that they deserved it, deserved to get AIDS. Excuse me. Deserve to be sexually molested by an adult male? I don't think so. So there's a lot that needs to be done to straighten out what's going on today, particularly with the use of the schools to indoctrinate and to seduce and to recruit children. Now, I mean, Judith, what would you say to Don Lemon? He admits he was molested, and now he's part of this gay rights, trend, and everybody's coming out of the closet and everything. It's just very sad. I would ask him, has he ever prosecuted the man who molested him? And he will tell me, no, he has not. And I would ask him why. A girl who has been molested has a right and ought to go after the guy who has molested her. Her parents should defend her. We don't call her just a whore. We don't. People used to say when girls were sexually promiscuous. A lot of times, what we're looking at when we deal with highly promiscuous girls, we're looking at early sexual abuse and their experiences. When you look at so many of the young women who are prostituting now, those are young women who've been molested as young girls, okay? So why is a boy who is molested, who enters into homosexuality, why is he different in that regard? Not at all. We have to find out who's doing this to these children. We have to arrest them. We have to put them in front of a jury. We have to try them, and we have to get them out of circulation. And people have a right to go after the men who have done this to them. Generally men. There have been some women, too. I just think it's the saddest thing when you see a guy who identifies as gay, rather than seeing the molestation as contributing. I don't know if it's some kind of a veil that comes over, how they end up saying that this was a positive experience that helped them discover their orientation. We actually hear men saying that. It's astonishing.
Well, we've got a defense mechanism that's going strong here, and besides, there's a huge confusion that young people, kids have. Adults have it too, but children especially when they first are exposed to something sexual, because the way in which the human brain is designed, the way in which the experience is processed, it is experienced as a confused arousal, an arousal that is very high because it's filled with fear and it's filled with shame, but it focuses on the reproductive organs. Mm-hmm. So you have a young boy or a young girl who is prematurely molested, and this happens very often in incest situations where the child is being violated and the hating it, and yet is having a sexual response. Well, you're dealing with their reproductive organs. So you have stimulated them prematurely in the reproductive area, and that is associated with high levels of shame and fear, which increases the arousal enormously, because arousal is not a word that's specific to sex at all. It's specific to fear more than anything else. And so it increases that arousal, and this poor child then is told by society, well, that means you're gay. Mm. You know, the society doesn't say, look, you're very confused here because we have done something to you that we should not have allowed in this society. We have confused you unmercifully. You know, you should not have been exposed to all of this at that age at all. And instead of that, we just relabel them the simple way, and they see it in the newspapers and they hear it in school, and so they believe it and they identify other people who tell them they're handsome and cute and beautiful, which they do up to the time they're about 24, 25, and then they're allegedly too old to be so beautiful and cute anymore. So this is a tragedy, and it ought to be corrected.
Wow, Judith, it's really amazing, and and I just wonder how many men have experienced that, an awful lot. Now, you're familiar, at least, with the whole idea. How is it true, as we allege, that homosexuality is vastly disproportionately represented among these child sexual molestation victims? In other words, why are there so many boy victims? There shouldn't be so many boys if homosexuality is not disproportionately involved in this.
Oh, there's no question about that. If we also did the research on that statistically, we're looking at perhaps 16 to 17% of boys, as far as we know at this point. And by the way, the Department of Justice put out the research that 64% of your forcible sodomy victims are boys under age 12. 64% of your forcible sodomy victims are boys under age 12. Now, is that scary or not?
Wow.
Where are the men who have been killing them? Because forcible sodomy, and if somebody has AIDS and is a carrier, you're talking about murder, for goodness sakes. But anyway, yeah, so when you've got 16% of the male population that's been molested as boys, and roughly 24, maybe 25% of girls, and you're talking about a roughly 2.5% of the male population being homosexual versus, say, 90% of males being purely heterosexual, yeah, then your rate of abuse of the boys by homosexual males is off the charts. It's off the charts. And Gene Abel, a very liberal guy who wishes he never did it, did the research on the number of victims per homosexual versus heterosexual, and came up with 120-some victims, as I recall, a few more, per homosexual male of young boys compared to 19 of young girls. And think about it; it makes sense. You know, John Smith is a coach. He comes to your house. You know, your husband is always working, or you're divorced, and he says, you know, I'd really like to take Tommy and Sam and Joe out on a camping trip. Mrs. Jones, how's that go for you? And she says, great, because he's got the male model, you know, coach and everything else. So she doesn't, you know, he's off and running with the boys, at least he always used to be. And suppose the same coach comes to your house and he says, I'd like to take Sally and Barbara right. and, you know, Joan on a camping trip with me. Well, Mrs., you know, she is not likely to say, go for it, coachy, you know, you're right. So even now she's not. And in early years, she was much less likely to do so. So access to boys has always been easier. Particularly boys leave the house, at a certain point. They always used to be able to get out, do stuff at the time that they would be most vulnerable. And girls were much more guarded until very recent years. And so, no, you're talking about a high rate of sexual abuse of boys by homosexual males, no question.
Wow.
Statistically.
Yes, and I think that's, the standard response as well. No, heterosexuals commit most abuses. Well, technically true, but I mean, we're talking about why so many boy victims, and I don't know if we'll ever get the liberal media to give a fair answer to that, Judith.
Well, no, you've got an awful lot of people who have investments in this. They want to be invited to the parties, number one, and they aren't going to be invited if they tell the truth. And then there are plenty who are doing doing this. So
right.
They're not going to tell the truth.
Right. We're talking to Judith Reisman. Her website is drjudithreisman.com. She's the author of Sexual Sabotage, which is available through WorldNet Daily Books. I'm Peter LaBarber with Americans for Truth. We want one more segment. Our website is americansfortruth.org. Welcome back to the last installment of part 2 of our 4-part interview with Judith Reisman. And Judith, you have many, many fans across the country because you are capable of explaining things simply, but very, very important subject matters that have been swept under the rug. And we're going to get into pornography, Kinsey's effect on pornography, and just the great work you've done in that area. But in what we were talking about here with the molestation and the gay identity, it just seems so fascinating to me. Ideas have consequences. And we live in this crazy culture now where, Judith, I'm sure you're not a fan of the show Glee, right? You're not watching that.
Oh my goodness.
Do you know what I saw? They another watershed event of the sordid nature in our culture occurred a few weeks ago when on this show Glee, which is wildly popular among young people, teenagers, including a lot of religious kids from religious homes watch this. And they had on this show, they had 2 male characters, teenage characters, who they'd been developing the whole season. And they were engaged in a passionate homosexual kiss that if had it been a male and a female, it would have been romantic. And it would have been something that was almost appealing. But this were 2 men. And I was struck when I saw it by the fact that
no. They were not 2 men. They were 2 boys.
2 boys. And you know what, Judith? I would have thought that 2 years ago the homosexual lobby would not have even attempted this. But here they are pushing it in prime time on TVs across the country.
Yeah, I saw the kiss.
You did? Okay. I mean,
yes, I did.
So, how it's only been a few short decades since Kinsey, and now we're at this stage where it seems we're witnessing the complete free fall of our Judeo-Christian morality in this area.
Yeah, I'm afraid, I mean, we can't even begin to suggest that this isn't a huge problem. We have people producing, homosexual males mostly, but there are lesbians too, who are producing these teenage films and teenage shows and whatnot. And they said that they were going to, quote unquote, push the envelope, which means go beyond anything and everything that American, society or normal society would accept. And so they script these young boys to kiss each other. Now, if the boys want the job and the boys want to be popular and the boys want to earn money and their parents want them to earn money, right? Because the parents had to consent, didn't they? Okay? So since we've got a parental support system here that will allow their children to be used, not just these boys, but the sexualization of girls all over the place on television and everywhere else, the sexualization, and by the way, not always are those kisses between a male and a female teenager that they're forced into, not always are those so romantic either. This is not the old days anymore, Sarah kind of thing, Sarah Jane. So So the envelope, quote unquote, is being pushed everywhere, and the children are absolutely being driven into sexual activity. Now, what happens once you start driving these children into premature sexual activity is that the same people who have been driving them into that activity are going to be on the boards of various organizations demanding that we lower the age of consent, because they'll be saying, as they are, gee whiz, children are already so sexual that we better not penalize them for their sexual activity, so we need to lower the age of consent. So it's taken us, I don't know how many years, to bring the age of consent up from 10 years old up to 21 years old, at a certain point where you were jail bait if you went with anybody had anything to do with a girl under 21, to a place where we have Skins and all these other kinds of television productions that are being put out there, where children are being brutally, barbarically exploited by the adults who are creating the material and by the parents who are selling their kids. Understand, when we look at that there are parents there that had to sign those permission slips for their children to be used really as deviant characters in one way or another, both the girls and the boys.
Yeah, and it's so sophisticated now, Judith. But back when I got a hold of some newsletters that were the first newsletter coming out of what became the homosexual movement, and they asked questions like, "Can homosexuals organize?" And we're seeing now almost the final stage, as it were. But you don't believe that. I mean, let's end this segment with something positive. What is the way back? I mean, you say that we were way better off with our old moral system. The one that talked about illegitimate children, and the one that talked about perverts, and
absolutely. Let's get back to the nasty words, instead of the nasty deeds.
I mean, on the homosexual issue, you've got the word gay, which sounds so positive, but you don't really think there's too much that's gay about this lifestyle, I'm assuming.
No, it's a death style, and everybody knows it's a death style. It's not gay. It's not happy. It's difficult enough for heterosexual people who come from good backgrounds, in this environment, to be able to maintain and establish real relationships and to be happy. It's impossibly difficult, really, for those who have been picked early on to engage in activities that are going to really thwart their lives and their happiness, and will expose them to every form of venereal disease, every form of disease, every form of emotional trauma. This is not a happy way to live, and the people who create those happy little glee things where they have those children kiss each other, they know it's not happy, and they themselves are suffering from various diseases, and they certainly aren't going to talk about what's on their body parts, as part of their seduction activities. So, no, I look, it's always darkest before the dawn. What can I say? People go through hell. I mean, we know the Soviet system. We know the German system. We know that societies have been destroyed that were highly evolved, and we are not immune from that. So either we fight for understanding what we came from, or we won't. That's what the whole first section of my book deals with, that whole issue. It's World War II. It's what we were. The documentation is there. We really were what our grandparents and great-grandparents said we were. We really, remember, Hugh Hefner himself was a virgin in college, like most guys, and so all that was reality. And yes, let's have 3 cheers for some repression. Let's have 3 cheers even more for some guilt. Let's have 12 cheers, for all kinds of things that keep us humane and keep us civil and civilized to each other, because otherwise, we are barbaric. And so this Judeo-Christian thing has actually saved our skins for years and years and allowed us to evolve to where we have the most wonderfully affluent society and everything at our fingertips. So it's time for us to turn around and start reevaluating and demand that we go back to the kind of life-saving behavior that has kept us healthy and allowed us to be the richest country in the world and the freest. Well
said, Judith. And we're talking to Judith Reisman. This is we've got a minute left, and And Judith, I'm going to remind people again, you talk about barbaric. That's one way to describe what went on at the Hyatt Regency Chicago, celebrating sadomasochism. Why not? There's no limits, So, but the book you alluded to is Sexual Sabotage.
Sabotage.
It's your latest book, and it is a wonderful read. Judith, it is available through WorldNet Daily Books. Just go to the WorldNet Daily website, WND.com. You can also get it through Amazon.
Local bookstores.
Local bookstores, if they don't have it, ask for it and ask your library to carry it. It's called Sexual Sabotage. Yes. It's by Dr. Judith Reisman, and her website is drjudithreisman.com. That's Dr. Judith Reisman, REISMAN.com. Our website is americansfortruth.org, where we archive all these interviews. We need support at Americans for Truth. We're up against a very powerful and well-funded homosexual activist lobby. Judith, we'll talk to you next time.
Yes, good job, Peter.
Thank you, and we'll talk to Judith Reisman, Part 3, next week. Again, our website, americansfortruth.org.